So today we are talking about Mahayana Buddhism, and we will compare Mahayana Buddhism with Theravada Buddhism, with the older version of Buddhism. And after that, we will focus more specifically on the Tibetan form of Buddhism and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. First, let me give you some general information about those two forms of Buddhism, Theravada and Mahayana. First, the words themselves. The word Theravada means the tradition of the elders. The tradition of the elders, that's how Theravada Buddhists call themselves. But they have another name, Hinayana. That's how Mahayana Buddhists call Theravada Buddhists. Hinayana Buddhism, the word Hinayana means the lesser vehicle toward salvation or toward enlightenment. Mahayana Buddhism, the word Mahayana means the greater vehicle toward salvation. So from these words, from the comparison between those two words, you can deduce that from its beginning, Mahayana Buddhism positioned itself as being superior to the older version of this religion. Now, Tibetan Buddhism is called Vajrayana, which means the diamond vehicle. And Tibetan Buddhism is considered to be part of Mahayana. Mahayana Buddhism is a kind of Buddhism that arose in India from about the 1st century after Christ onward. This new school claimed to offer salvation for all. And it named itself Mahayana, as I said, which means the greater vehicle toward salvation. Mahayanists would usually say that Hinayana was good, but not good enough, did not go far enough. So therefore, although Mahayana positioned itself to be superior to Hinayana, the two forms of Buddhism never had conflicts with each other. In fact, the older and the newer branches of Buddhism flourished side by side in India during the early centuries of the Christian era. In Buddhist monasteries, some of the monks were Mahayanists and some Hinayanists. In general, the Buddhists of northwestern India were either Mahayanists or Hinayanists that were much affected by Mahayana Buddhism. It was from that part of India, northwestern India, that this kind of Buddhism spread throughout Central Asia to China. So therefore, the countries where you can find Theravada are Sri Lanka, Laos, Thailand, Myanmar, and Cambodia, and Mahayana Buddhist countries are China, Japan, Mongolia, Tibet, and Bhutan. Theravada and Mahayana Buddhists share a lot in common. Both Mahayana and Theravada Buddhists believe in the Buddha as the founder of their religion. They believe in the Four Noble Truths as the foundation of their teaching. They believe in the Sangha as the community of believers. But there are serious, important differences between the two versions of Buddhism. And we will discuss those differences in reference to Buddhist scriptures, to the nature of the Buddha himself, to the nature of the Enlightenment, and to the social vision of Buddhism. Let me start with the scriptures, with the sacred texts. The earliest sacred texts of Buddhism are called Tripitaka Canon. Tripitaka means three baskets, or three groups, or three sections of the sacred scriptures. The Tripitaka Canon was formed by the 3rd century before the Christian era. Historical science cannot either prove or disprove the authenticity of those books. After the death of the Buddha, according to the tradition, several councils took place in which Buddhist monks were trying to come up with some consensus about the Buddhist teachings. So probably as a result of those councils, the Tripitaka Canon was formed. As I said, we cannot prove its authenticity, so we just have to take it for granted. The first of the baskets, or the first of the sections, is devoted to the lifestyle of the monks. It prescribes the regulations which monks, Buddhist monks and nuns should follow in their daily routine. The daily routine of monks and nuns is very difficult in any religious tradition, be it in Orthodoxy or Orthodox Christianity or Catholicism or Buddhism. So a Buddhist monk, for example, wakes up around 4 a.m., has a long day ahead of him. The day has no slack in it. The daily routine is about meditation, studying scriptures, teaching scriptures to lay Buddhists. Monks usually move from one village to another because they beg for food and for shelter. They eat their last meal at noon. Afternoon, they abstain from eating. That is probably the hardest thing to do. Serious kind of fasting, everyday fasting. And they go to sleep around 8 or 9 p.m. The second basket, or the second section of the scriptures, includes the discourses of the Buddha, his dialogues with his disciples. And of course, this is of most importance as well because it is the basis for Buddhist doctrines. However, as I mentioned, we cannot prove or disprove the authenticity of those books. And finally, the third section includes some additional materials on various subjects that are related to the Buddhist religion. For example, philosophy and psychology, first of all, because both philosophy and psychology are very important in Buddhist tradition, which is introspective. The enlightenment depends on how well you understand yourself and how well you understand how your psyche works. So therefore, philosophy and psychology are extremely important in that tradition. As for Mahayana Buddhists, they do accept the Tripitaka Canon, but they believe that the canon is good, but not good enough. Mahayana Buddhists developed their own scriptural texts, which they think and they believe represent the culmination of Buddhism and Buddhist doctrines. There are many sutras or many books in Mahayana Buddhism, but I would like to discuss briefly only two of them, Prajnaparamita Sutras and the Lotus of the Good Law, because those two sutras present the central doctrines of Mahayana as we know it today. So first one, Prajnaparamita Sutras. These sutras have been written approximately between the 1st century before Christ and the 1st century after Christ. And Prajnaparamita Sutras are talking about the perfections that the follower of this form of Buddhism should practice. The perfection of giving, the perfection of self-sacrifice, the perfection of compassion, etc. And while mastering all these perfections, the adept or the follower should also master the crowning perfection, which is the perfection of wisdom. The perfection of wisdom is when you do all those good things that you do, when you actualize the virtues, when you practice the virtues without any thought of self-congratulation or self-indulgence, without any egocentric impulse inside you. That is called the perfection of wisdom. And the second sutra, which is called the Lotus of the Good Law, is a later sutra that arose around the 2nd century after Christ. And in the Lotus of the Good Law, we have two major doctrines that would become the cornerstone of Mahayana Buddhism. The first one is about the spiritual universe. According to the Lotus of the Good Law, our material universe is encompassed by the spiritual universe, and those two realms of reality ran parallel to each other. So the spiritual universe is a dwelling place of spiritual beings, and some of those spiritual beings are in charge, oversee what is happening on earth and trying to help people. The second key idea of the Lotus of the Good Law is even more important than the idea of two parallel worlds or two parallel realms, the material and the spiritual. Now, as you remember, Buddhism started as a religion without God. The scholarly language for that is non-theistic religion, religion without God. Buddha was a natural but extraordinary person. He achieved nirvana, he died, and he is dissolved in nirvana, but he is not God, who continues his eternal existence somewhere in heaven. So what happens with Mahayana Buddhism is that Mahayana deifies the Buddha. In Mahayana, Buddha becomes a god, not simply a person. And this deification is happening based on the doctrine of the three bodies of the Buddha: the body of magic transformations, the body of bliss, and the body of essence. This may sound like the Christian Trinity, and we also may remember that Jesus was deified also about 4 centuries after his life and death. In the Council at Nicaea in 325, Christian leaders came up with the idea of the Trinity, and the idea of the Trinity was that doctrine that made Jesus officially God, Son of God, sharing the same essence as the Father. So a similar process we see here, but the doctrine is slightly different. The body of magic transformations is the physical body of the Buddha. According to Buddhism, there have been many Buddhas, and each Buddha had his own physical body. So that's why magic transformations. You can get reincarnated into another body, and this power of enlightenment manifested itself in different bodies. So our Buddha has his own physical body. But in addition to his physical body, he had a spiritual body. The spiritual body is called the body of bliss. Remember those two universes, spiritual and material, that ran parallel to each other. So the Buddha, who had a physical body, also had a spiritual body that was encompassing his physical body. And this spiritual body was unique to him. Now, in addition to those physical and spiritual bodies, our Buddha also had the body of essence. And unlike the physical and the spiritual bodies, the body of essence is one and the same for all the Buddhas that had ever lived. So if we continue our comparison with Christianity, the body of essence can be compared probably with God the Father. It is the source of power. It is the source of enlightenment. And in Mahayana Buddhism, the body of essence is equated with Buddha nature. So when the Tibetan Book of the Dead is speaking about the clear light that people see when they die, they refer not to something abstract. They do not refer to the Holy Spirit or to Jesus. They do refer to the body of essence or to the Buddha nature, because in Mahayana Buddhism, to achieve enlightenment means to achieve the state of Buddhahood, to partake of the Buddha nature. Moving forward. Now let's talk about how Theravada and Mahayana Buddhists think of the Buddha. As I said before, for Theravada Buddhists, the Buddha was a human being, not God, a natural but extraordinary being. For Mahayana Buddhism, Buddha is not simply a human being. He is the divine being, and this doctrine of three bodies, the body of magic transformations, and the body of bliss, and the body of essence, which can be found in the Lotus of the Good Law, becomes the cornerstone of Mahayana Buddhism. Mahayana Buddhism, unlike Theravada, is already a theistic Buddhism, very different Buddhism from what we saw in the older version of this religion. Now let's talk a little bit about the Enlightenment and how those two versions of Buddhism understand the Enlightenment. According to Theravada teachings, anyone can achieve enlightenment. Anyone has the potential for enlightenment. However, in order to achieve enlightenment, you have to be a full-time practitioner. You have to be a full-time Buddhist. Because enlightenment is a serious endeavor, and it requires your full commitment. So therefore, in Theravada Buddhism, only people who become monks or nuns have the practical capacity to attain enlightenment. Lay Buddhists cannot do that because they devote their lives not to religious matters exclusively, but also to secular matters. So a person who has the potential of enlightenment in this life is a monk or a nun, and this person is called an arhat. An arhat is a person who, in the beginning of his or her path toward enlightenment, is becoming a stream winner. The stream winner is the person who is able to concentrate fully on achieving the enlightenment and is not distracted by any other thoughts, intentions, or desires. So becoming a stream winner is simply the beginning of the path. And the path toward enlightenment is very difficult, requires a lot of discipline, as we remember from the first section of the scriptures that regulate the life of monks and nuns. So the process of enlightenment is very difficult. It requires a lot of work, and Theravada tradition preaches enlightenment for oneself. You basically commit to this path, and you work on your own psyche, on your own self, in order to achieve enlightenment for yourself. Now, Mahayana Buddhists say that this is good, but not good enough. And the most important problem with this idea of arhatship for Mahayana is that enlightenment for oneself sounds selfish, and Buddhism is about selflessness. So therefore, instead of arhatship, they promote the idea of becoming a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva literally means the being of wisdom. The bodhisattva is a person who achieved enlightenment in Mahayana Buddhism, but who decides to get reincarnated. He may not, but he decides to, in order to help others. In fact, in order to help everyone to achieve the enlightenment. So the difference between this ideal of the Enlightenment, between Theravada and Mahayana, is the difference between the enlightenment for oneself and the enlightenment for others or everyone. And finally, a couple of words about the social order and different social teachings in Theravada and Mahayana. According to Theravada, society should be organized, and this threefold social organization include monks, nuns, and lay Buddhists. Now, spiritually speaking, monks and nuns are equal because both men and women can achieve salvation. But socially speaking, in Theravada Buddhism, the order of nuns should be subordinated to the order of monks. Now, spiritually speaking, lay Buddhists are inferior to monks and nuns because they will not be able to achieve salvation in this present lifetime. But both lay Buddhists on the one hand and monks and nuns on the other hand have their mutual responsibilities. Monks and nuns are responsible for teaching lay Buddhists about the doctrines. And it is the responsibility of lay Buddhists to provide food and shelter for monks and nuns when they come to their village. Now, Mahayana Buddhists, as always, say that it is good but not good enough because Buddhism is an egalitarian religion, and in fact, everyone can attain enlightenment in their present lifetime. It does not necessarily depend on whether you are monk, nun, or a lay Buddhist, because it depends on how ready you are for the enlightenment. You may have been born advanced, spiritually advanced, so advanced that you may experience the enlightenment in this present lifetime without any effort. The enlightenment, according to Mahayana Buddhists, can be sudden. It may happen to you without any serious work and effort, or it may happen to you with serious work and effort. In other words, Mahayana Buddhists promote the equality of all believers, both in spiritual and social matters. And some scholars even argue that it was this central claim of equality for all believers that made Mahayana different from Theravada. Now let's move specifically to Tibetan Buddhism and to the Tibetan Book of the Dead. As I said, Tibetan Buddhism, or Vajrayana Buddhism, Diamond Vehicle Buddhism, is part of Mahayana. So therefore, Tibetan Buddhism shares those doctrines that we were talking about. But in addition to that, Tibetan Buddhists developed their own version of Buddhism, and an important feature of that version is manifested in this Books of the Dead. Tibetan Book of the Dead is not just simply one book. It is a literary genre of books. It has a practical rather than literary purpose. And this genre can be defined as funerary texts. Funerary texts known as Bardo Todol, meaning liberation through hearing in an intermediary state. In the West, Bardo Todol, this Tibetan Book of the Dead, was first discovered in 1919, first published in English in 1927, never went out of print since then, because it is a unique book. And I think not only in Buddhism, but in all religious traditions. It is a funerary text that is read aloud in the presence of a dying or recently deceased person. Now, according to the Tibetan Buddhist view, when a person dies, he or she experiences the state between the previous state of life and the future state of life reincarnated. This intermediate state is called bardo. Bardo literally means between the two, and it refers to this intermediate state between life and rebirth. Now here I have to say a couple of words about the Buddhist idea of karma, which Buddhists share with Hindus, with Jains, and with Sikh. The reason I have to talk about karma is because we in the West know this word and use it very often and think we know the meaning of it. But in fact, the way we understand the term karma in the West differs from how Eastern people, meaning Hindus, Buddhists, etc., understand karma within the context of their religion. So, what is karma? What does the word karma literally mean? Karma means action. So, karma can be translated as consequences of one's actions. And here comes the first difference between our Western and Eastern understanding of the same term. For us, karma is kind of a destiny or fate. We often say, well, this is my karma. That should have happened to me. For Hindus and Buddhists, karma is not an external force that makes me do something. Karma is my responsibility for my own actions. I am what I do. And what I do leaves me with some kind of karma, either bad or good. And depending upon what karma I actually possess, I will experience a certain reincarnation, either in the better realm of life or in the worse realm of life. So here comes the second difference between our Western and Buddhist understanding of karma. In our Western traditions, we do not believe in reincarnation. So therefore, the effect of karma is usually applied to this present life. In Buddhism, as well as in other religions that were born in India, the results, the implications of karma are not necessarily seen in this life. They can actually influence our next rebirth. So if I've done something good in this life, I may be born in a better position, social position, for example, in my next life. And the opposite is true as well. But here comes the third and the most important difference between how karma is understood in the West and in the East. We in the West believe that it is good to accumulate a good karma, that the true path in life is to avoid doing bad things in order not to accumulate evil karma, but to do a good thing. Now, in Buddhism, as well as in Hinduism, in all those religions that believe in reincarnation, the idea of karma is rather different. The goal is not to have good karma. The goal is not to have karma whatsoever. Why? Because as long as you accumulate karma, you will be reincarnated. And reincarnation means that you come back to this material universe. And this material universe is like a school of life. You have to learn your lessons. If you reincarnate, it means that you have not learned all of your lessons. It means that you come back. It's like a Groundhog Day. You wake up in the same reality because you cannot understand the meaning of life. What the Enlightenment is is this understanding of the meaning of life, and more importantly, the understanding that life is impermanent and meaningless, that makes you avoid the karma and makes you escape the new reincarnation. So the main purpose of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is to help a dead person to avoid reincarnation. We may say that Christians want to be born again, while Buddhists do not want to be born again. Being born again is like being a very bad student. You failed last time, you failed thousands of times before that. And if you are reincarnated again, it means that you may fail again. The goal is not to get reincarnated. The goal is to go beyond, to be able to go beyond the will of samsara, the will of dependent origination. And most of the people die without being enlightened. So therefore, the purpose, the practical purpose of the Tibetan Book of the Dead is to help people get enlightened while in this intermediate state and not to be reincarnated. Now let's talk more specifically about those different states in which you find yourself in the bardo. And of course, as I said during our discussions, this is simply a series of beliefs, and there is no scientific evidence or proof that those bardos do exist. So let's talk more specifically about various stages that you go through in this intermediary state or bardo between your previous incarnation and your next reincarnation. According to the Book of the Dead, the first thing that you experience is the primary clear light. The primary clear light in this context is a reference to the Buddha nature, to the body of essence. You have to realize that you are dead. You have to become conscious of it, because according to the Buddhist doctrine, understanding is enlightenment. When we understand our true state of life at this moment, we understand that we have the opportunity not to be reincarnated. If we do not understand this, if we are ignorant of that, if we did not replace ignorance with knowledge and wisdom, then we move on to the next level of experience. After the primary clear light, we see the secondary clear light. And the reader of the book is repeating this in order for us to understand what we are experiencing. Now, according to the Tibetan Buddhist belief, when the person dies, he or she still retains some connection with their physical body. Although the physical body is dead, technically speaking, our consciousness is still connected with the physical body through some kind of magnetic energy, subtle energy. And we can still hear the reader. So the purpose of the reader is to encourage us to understand the state in which we find ourselves in. Now, if at the first stage, which is called the bardo of the moment of death, we still did not reach an understanding, we are forced into the second bardo, the second bardo of the experience of reality. Here, as the book tells us, for 7 days, we experience the apparition of 42 peaceful deities. Now, the reader is telling us this and is reminding us that we have to understand that those deities do not represent reality, that they simply emanate from our own psyche. According to the book, those deities emanate from our heart. Then, the next 7 days, we experience the apparition of 58 wrathful deities. Those deities also emanate from our psyche. According to the book, they emanate from our brain. The purpose of the reader is to make us understand that this experience of those deities is not real, that this is an illusion, and this is simply a manifestation of our psychological state. If we understand this, we are immediately enlightened, because knowledge is enlightenment, ignorance is imprisonment. So if we do not understand in the second stage of our bardo experience that what we experience is not real, then we are forced into the third bardo, which is called the bardo of rebirth. Now, when we are in this third bardo, there is no way for us to get enlightened. We are already moving forward to our next reincarnation, which means that we failed this time. We have to be reborn. The book describes this by saying that during this stage, we already feel the pain, and this pain can be removed, can be exhausted only by the next reincarnation. So we are looking for an appropriate body to get reincarnated into, because we want not to experience this pain. And finally, we are finding the body, we are getting reincarnated, and the cycle continues again and again until we finally will achieve the enlightenment. So this concludes my lecture on Mahayana Buddhism and the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.